The mist rolls in from the Bristol Channel tonight, thick and salt-laden, carrying with it the smell of kelp and ancient stone. It clings to the weathered walls of the villa, seeping through the cracks in the plaster, where once bright frescoes depicted gods who no longer answer prayers. Inside, Marcus Flavius Cornelius sits by a dying fire, watching the embers pulse like the fading heartbeat of an empire. The year is 410, and across the narrow sea, Rome herself has fallen to the Visigoths. But here, on this remote western edge of Britannia, the news has not yet arrived. Here, for one more night, the world is still Roman. The fire crackles, spitting sparks onto the mosaic floor, and Marcus shifts in his chair, feeling the weight of his 60 years in every joint. The chair itself is old, older than him, carved from oak when his grandfather first came to this land with the legions. The wood is smooth now, polished by generations of restless hands, and it creaks with a voice Marcus has come to know as well as his own. Outside, the wind picks up, and he can hear it moving through the apple orchard, rustling leaves that will soon fall to join the generations of leaves that came before. Autumn has arrived early this year, or perhaps he simply notices it more now. The way an old man notices the passage of time with an urgency the young cannot comprehend. His daughter, Julia, enters the room carrying a clay lamp filled with olive oil. The flame dances as she walks, casting moving shadows across the walls where the plaster has begun to peel, revealing the native stone beneath. She is 23, with her mother's dark eyes and his own stubborn chin. Her stola, once dyed a rich saffron yellow, has faded to the color of old parchment, and there are careful stitches along the hem where she has mended it herself. The dye merchant stopped coming from Londinium 3 years ago, along with the wool traders and the wine merchants, and all the others who once made the roads between the cities feel alive with commerce and conversation. "You should sleep, father," she says, setting the lamp on the table beside him. Her voice is soft, but there is something in it tonight, an edge of worry that makes him look up at her more carefully. "Sleep finds me less and less these days," he replies, managing a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. "I find myself preferring the company of memories to dreams." She kneels beside his chair, and he catches the scent of the rose oil she still uses sparingly, saved from happier times. "Cassius returned from the villa to the south," she says, referring to one of their few remaining servants, a man who has been with the family since before Marcus's own father died. He says the Dubani family has abandoned their estate, simply left in the night, heading for Gaul. Marcus nods slowly, unsurprised. The Dubani have always been practical people, quicker than most to read the changing winds. "They go to seek what protection remains of Rome," he says, "though I suspect they will find precious little." The empire contracts like a dying man, drawing his limbs close to his body, trying to protect the vital organs, while the extremities grow cold and numb. "Should we not do the same?" Julia asks, and there is no accusation in her voice, only genuine curiosity. "Your cousin still has property near Arles. He has written that we would be welcome." "To abandon our home?" Marcus reaches out and takes her hand, feeling how rough it has become from work. Once, she had servants to do the grinding of grain and the drawing of water. Now she does it herself, and her hands tell the story of that change. "This land has been Roman for 360 years. My grandfather fought beside Claudius himself to bring civilization to these shores. Would you have me spit on his memory by fleeing at the first true test?" But even as he says it, he knows it is more than just the first test. The legions began withdrawing 20 years ago, pulled back to defend the homeland as barbarian tribes pressed in from every direction. The last true Roman garrison left Britain 5 years past, and since then, the cities have begun to empty, the roads to decay, the great public works to crumble. The bathhouse in the village has been cold for 3 winters now, its hypocaust system broken, and no one remaining who remembers how to fix it. The aqueduct that once brought fresh water from the hills runs dry, its channels clogged with leaves and earth. Julia squeezes his hand gently. "I only think of the future," she says, "of what kind of world waits for us when the last of Rome's protection is gone." "The world that waits is the world we make," Marcus replies, though he hears the hollowness in his own words. "We are Romans, Julia. That means something. That must continue to mean something, even if Rome herself has fallen." She rises and kisses his forehead, a gesture that reminds him painfully of her mother, dead these 10 years from a fever that a proper Roman physician might have cured, but which their local healer could only ease with willow bark tea and prayers, to gods who seem no longer to be listening. "I will leave you to your memories then," she says. "But do not stay up too late. The autumn nights grow cold, and we have little enough fuel to waste." After she leaves, Marcus sits in the gathering darkness, the single lamp flame his only companion. He can hear the sounds of the household settling for the night, the scrape of a bar being set across the main door, the low murmur of voices from the servants' quarters, the distant bark of a dog from the village beyond the orchard. These are the sounds he has known all his life, the familiar rhythms of a world that is ending, though most refuse to see it yet. He thinks back to his childhood, when this villa had been alive with activity. His father had employed 30 servants then, and the estate had produced enough grain and wool to trade as far as Gaul and Hispania. The villa itself had been magnificent. 20 rooms arranged around a central courtyard where a fountain splashed day and night, fed by that same aqueduct that now runs dry. The walls had been painted with elaborate scenes from the Aeneid, showing Aeneas fleeing burning Troy to found a new civilization in Italy. How appropriate, Marcus thinks now, how darkly appropriate that his ancestors chose to decorate their British home with images of refugees fleeing a fallen city. The dining room had hosted feasts in those days, elaborate affairs where local magistrates and traveling merchants would recline on couches and eat dormice stuffed with honey and poppy seeds, peacock tongues in garum sauce, fresh oysters brought alive from the coast packed in seaweed and ice. Wine would flow from amphorae stamped with marks from vineyards in Campania and Rhodes, and even from the mysterious lands beyond Egypt. After dinner there would be poetry recitations and philosophical debates, discussions of Cicero and Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, the great emperor-philosopher who had died nearly 2.5 centuries before Marcus was born, but whose words still resonated through the empire like the echo of a great bell that, once struck, never fully ceased its ringing. Now the dining room stands empty, its frescoes faded and water-stained where the roof has begun to leak. They eat in the kitchen, simple meals of barley porridge and vegetables from the garden, occasionally supplemented with a chicken from the coop or a hare that Cassius manages to snare. The wine cellar has been empty for years. They drink beer now, like the natives, brewed from their own grain, and Marcus has learned to tolerate its bitter, yeasty taste, though he still remembers the sweet richness of Falernian wine and mourns its loss. The wind gusts again, stronger this time, and he hears a shutter bang somewhere in the villa. He should get up and secure it, but he finds himself reluctant to leave the warmth of the fire, meager as it is. Age has made him sensitive to cold, and he dreads the coming winter more than he cares to admit, even to himself. Last winter they lost 2 of the elderly servants to pneumonia, and there had been weeks when the snow lay so deep that they could not reach the village, isolated completely within their crumbling walls. His mind drifts back further, past his own childhood to the stories his grandfather used to tell. Gaius Cornelius had been a centurion in the 2nd Legion Augusta when they invaded Britain under Emperor Claudius. He used to describe the landing, how the ships had beached on the southern coast and the legionaries had waded ashore in full armor, shields locked in testudo formation against a rain of native arrows. The Britons had been fierce fighters, Gaius always said with a note of respect in his voice, painted with blue woad and screaming their war cries in a language that sounded like the barking of seals. But they had been no match for Roman discipline, for the grinding, relentless efficiency of the legion. Gaius had fought in the final battle against Caratacus, the British war leader who had resisted Rome for 9 years before finally being defeated and captured. Marcus remembered his grandfather describing how Caratacus had been brought to Rome itself in chains, how he had walked through the Forum and seen the magnificent buildings and public works, and had said to the Emperor Claudius, "When you have such possessions, why do you covet our poor huts?" It was a question that still echoed down through the centuries, Marcus thought. Why indeed? But Rome had coveted them, had conquered them, and for 3.5 centuries had held this island in its grip, transforming it from a land of warring tribes and hill forts into a province of paved roads and stone cities, of public baths and amphitheaters, of law and order and civilization. And now, in the span of a single generation, it was all unraveling. Marcus rises stiffly from his chair and walks to the window. The shutters here are still intact, and he pushes them open to look out at the night. The mist has grown thicker, and he can barely see the outline of the orchard, the gnarled apple trees appearing as vague shadows in the darkness. Beyond the orchard lies the village, a collection of roundhouses built in the old British style, though even there Roman influence has seeped in over the centuries. Some of the houses have been rebuilt with stone foundations, and most of the villagers speak at least some Latin in addition to their native Brythonic tongue. The village headman, a man named Caradoc, whose grandfather had taken the Roman name Caractacus in honor of the ancient war leader, has been a friend to Marcus for many years. They have shared bread and salt, made agreements about the use of common land, settled disputes according to Roman law, but Marcus has noticed something changing in Caradoc's manner lately, a certain distance that was not there before. The old man no longer refers to himself by his Roman name, and his son, who should be learning Latin at the villa school, has instead been studying the old ways with the village druid, a wizened woman who still remembers the rituals that Rome tried to suppress centuries ago. A movement in the darkness catches his eye, and Marcus strains to see what it is. For a moment, he thinks he sees figures moving through the mist, but then they are gone, if they were ever there at all. His eyes are not what they used to be, especially at night. The physician in Londinium had told him years ago that this was normal for men of his age, that the humors of the eye become imbalanced, and that there was little to be done about it. He had prescribed a tincture made from fennel and honey, but Marcus cannot say it has made much difference. He closes the shutters and returns to his chair, pulling a woolen blanket over his legs. The weaving is coarse, nothing like the fine fabrics that used to come from the imperial workshops. But it is warm enough. Julia made it herself last winter, working at the old loom in the corner of the main hall. And he appreciates the love that went into every thread even as he mourns the loss of the fine things they once took for granted. His thoughts turn to his son, Lucius, who left 3 years ago to seek his fortune in Gaul. Marcus had not wanted him to go, had argued that a man's place was with his family, protecting their land and preserving their heritage. But Lucius had been adamant. "There is nothing left for me here, father," he had said. "The villa shrinks every year. The tenants abandon their plots. The roads fill with bandits. I will not wait here to slowly starve while pretending that Rome will return to save us. I will go where there is still some remnant of civilization, where a man can make his way through trade or service." And so Lucius had left, and Marcus had not heard from him in over a year. The last letter had come from a trading post near Lugdunum, and Lucius had written of finding work with a wine merchant, of plans to establish his own business once he had saved enough money. But the letter had been brief and formal, with none of the warmth that Marcus had hoped for. It had read more like a report to a stranger than a letter to a father. The fire has burned down to glowing coals now, pulsing in the darkness like distant stars. Marcus closes his eyes and tries to remember what it was like when he was young, when the world seemed solid and permanent, when being Roman meant something beyond mere ancestry. He remembers his father teaching him to read from a scroll of Virgil, how the words had seemed magical, opening up worlds of heroes and gods and destinies written in the stars. He remembers learning mathematics using an abacus, the wooden beads clicking as he calculated the yields from the estate, the taxes owed to the empire, the profits to be made from the sale of wool and grain. He remembers his first visit to Londinium when he was 10 years old, how the city had seemed impossibly vast and sophisticated. The Forum with its basilica, the stone bridge across the Thamesis, the merchants from every corner of the empire selling silk from Syrica and spices from India and ostrich feathers from beyond the deserts of Africa. He had eaten his first orange there, a fruit shipped from Hispania, and the sweet tartness had exploded on his tongue like nothing he had ever tasted. His father had laughed at his expression and had bought him a second one, an extravagance that Marcus had appreciated even then. Londinium is still there, of course, but it is not what it was. The last time Marcus visited, 8 years ago for a legal dispute over water rights, he had been shocked by how much the city had declined. Whole neighborhoods stood empty, their buildings scavenged for stone and timber. The Forum was deserted, its great hall echoing and cold. Beggars slept in the porticos, where merchants used to sell their wares. The amphitheater had been closed, its gates chained, weeds growing up through the cracks in the arena floor. He had won his legal case, but even that victory had felt hollow. The magistrate who heard the case was a local man, not a trained Roman jurist, and his understanding of the law had been shaky at best. The verdict had gone in Marcus's favor more because of his family's reputation and the friendship the magistrate's father had once shared with Marcus's own father than because of any careful consideration of legal precedent. It was the law of personalities and connections, not the law of Rome, and Marcus had left the city feeling more depressed than vindicated. A sound from outside brings him back to the present. It is a distant sound, almost swallowed by the wind, but his hearing is still sharp enough to catch it. Dogs barking in the village, not the usual casual barking of animals settling for the night, but something more urgent, more alarmed. Marcus sits up straight, his heart beginning to beat faster. He tells himself it is nothing, probably just a fox getting too close to someone's chicken coop, but some instinct makes him uneasy. He rises and walks to the door of the room, opening it to listen more carefully. The house is quiet, everyone else asleep, but the barking continues, and now he can hear shouting as well, faint voices carried on the wind. Something is wrong. Marcus moves quickly now, years of military drill from his youth coming back to his body. His father had insisted that he serve with the auxiliaries for 3 years, even though his status as a landowner's son would have exempted him. Every Roman should know how to fight, his father had said. Property and wealth mean nothing if you cannot defend them. Marcus had resented the service at the time, had hated the brutal training and the coarse companionship of common soldiers, but now he finds himself grateful for those lessons. He makes his way through the dark villa to Julia's room, his feet knowing the path even in near total darkness. He knocks urgently on her door. Julia, wake up. Something is happening in the village. He hears movement inside, and then the door opens. Julia stands there in her nightdress, her long, dark hair loose around her shoulders, her face marked with sleep but quickly clearing. What is it? I don't know, but we need to wake everyone and secure the house. Now. She nods and disappears back into her room to dress. Marcus continues on, rousing Cassius and the other servants, a total of 5 people now where once there had been 30. They gather in the main hall, carrying lamps and looking to him for guidance with frightened faces. "Bar all the doors and shutters," Marcus commands, slipping easily into the voice of authority his father had taught him. "Cassius, check that the gate to the outer wall is secured. Everyone else, gather what valuables we have and bring them to the strong room. Move quickly but quietly. We don't know what we're facing yet." As they scatter to their tasks, Julia appears, now dressed in a practical tunic and with her hair bound back. "Should I wake the children?" she asks. Marcus had forgotten for a moment that Julia's 2 young sons, his grandsons, were sleeping in the nursery on the upper floor. "No, let them sleep unless it becomes necessary. They are safer ignorant of danger than terrified of it." Julia nods and moves to help with securing the shutters. Marcus himself goes to the small room where he keeps the few weapons that remain. A gladius that had belonged to his grandfather, its blade still sharp despite its age, and 2 spears that the servants use when hunting wild boar in the woods beyond the estate. He takes the gladius for himself, feeling its familiar weight in his hand, and distributes the spears to Cassius and to Marcus's nephew, a boy of 16 named Publius, who had come to live with them after his father died of a wasting sickness 2 years ago. By the time the house is secured, the sounds from the village have grown louder. Marcus can now clearly hear screaming, and he sees an orange glow beginning to light up the night sky. Fire. The village is burning. "God in heaven," Julia whispers, coming to stand beside him at the main hall window, peering out through the gap in the shutters. "Who would do this? Saxons, perhaps," Marcus says grimly. "They have been raiding the coast with increasing boldness. Or it could be Irish pirates from across the Western Sea. Or," he pauses, not wanting to voice the worst possibility. "Or it could be our own people," Julia finishes for him, her voice hollow. "The villagers themselves." Marcus says nothing, but he knows she is right. This is the real terror that has been growing in his heart for years now. Not the threat of foreign raiders, terrible as they are, but the threat of civilization simply dissolving, of the bonds that hold society together fraying until every man's hand is turned against his neighbor in a desperate scramble for survival. The glow of fire grows brighter, and now Marcus can see flames leaping into the night sky. The wind is carrying the smoke toward the villa, and he can smell it, acrid and ominous. Cassius appears at his side, breathing hard. "Master, there are men approaching the gate." Many men carrying torches. Marcus's hand tightens on the hilt of the gladius. "How many?" "I counted at least 20, perhaps more. 20 men. Marcus has 5 people in the villa capable of fighting, and 2 of them are elderly. There is no way they can hold out against a determined assault, not with the walls in the state they are in. Sections of the outer wall have crumbled over the years, and he has lacked the resources to repair them properly. In places, a determined man could simply climb over the rubble. "Everyone to the strong room," he says quietly. "We will barricade ourselves inside and hope they take what they want from the rest of the villa and leave us alone." But even as he says it, he knows it is a forlorn hope. If these men are desperate enough to burn their own village, they will not leave the villa unmolested. The strong room will buy them time, nothing more. They hurry through the dark house, Julia carrying the youngest of her sons, who has woken and begun to cry, confused and frightened by the urgency in the adults' voices. The strong room is in the center of the villa, built by Marcus's grandfather to store the family's valuables and important documents. It has thick stone walls and a heavy oak door that can be barred from the inside. It is designed to withstand a fire or a quick smash-and-grab raid, but Marcus knows it will not hold for long against determined men with tools and time. They crowd inside, all 8 of them, the space that had once seemed spacious now feeling claustrophobic. Marcus bars the door and then turns to face his family and servants in the dim light of a single lamp. He can see the fear in their faces, and he searches for words that will give them comfort but finds none. "Whatever happens," he says finally, "remember that you are Romans. Remember that there is something larger than ourselves, larger than our individual lives that we are part of. The empire may fall, civilization may crumble, but the idea of Rome, the idea that there can be law and order and beauty in the world, that idea cannot die unless we let it." He knows the words sound hollow even as he speaks them. Desperate philosophy of a man watching his world end, but he speaks them anyway, because words are all he has left, and words matter, even in the darkness. Outside, they hear the crash of the gate being broken down, and then the sound of many feet entering the villa grounds, voices shouting in Latin and in Brythonic, mixing together in a linguistic chaos that seems to mirror the social chaos that has given birth to this night. There is laughter, too, a wild, manic sound that chills Marcus to his core. These are not disciplined soldiers or even organized raiders. These are desperate men who have lost everything and now seek to take everything they can from those who still possess something, anything worth taking. The sounds of destruction begin. Marcus hears pottery smashing, wood splintering, the crash of furniture being overturned. He hears men calling to each other, arguing over the best loot, laughing at some private joke. At one point, someone tries the door to the strong room, rattling it violently, but the bar holds and whoever it is moves on to easier pickings. They huddle in the darkness for what seems like hours, though Marcus knows it cannot be more than one. Julia has both her sons pressed against her, their faces buried in her tunic, her hands over their ears to block out the sounds of violation happening to their home. Cassius sits with his back against the wall, his weathered face expressionless, though Marcus can see his lips moving in silent prayer. The old man is praying to Mithras, Marcus realizes, the soldier's god that his own grandfather had worshipped, a cult that had been popular in the legions, but which had faded over the centuries as Christianity spread. Marcus himself prays too, though he is not sure to whom. He had been raised Christian, had been baptized in the old Roman style when he was an infant, but his faith has always been more a matter of social custom than deep conviction. In this moment, faced with the collapse of everything he has known, he finds himself reaching out to any god who might be listening, the Christ and the old Roman gods, and even the native British deities his ancestors had tried to suppress. If there are powers beyond this mortal world, he prays, let them see fit to spare his family, if nothing else. Finally, after an eternity compressed into minutes, the sounds of destruction begin to fade. Marcus hears voices growing more distant, footsteps retreating. He risks cracking open the door just a sliver, peering out into the darkness of the villa. The lamp has been extinguished, but there is enough light from the fires still burning in the village to see that the main hall has been thoroughly ransacked. Furniture overturned, pottery smashed, the faded frescoes on the walls defaced with what looks like excrement. The old mosaic floor, which had depicted Orpheus charming the animals with his lyre, is barely visible beneath a layer of debris. Stay here, he tells the others. I will check if they have truly gone. He makes his way carefully through the ruined villa, the gladius held ready in his hand, though he doubts he would be much use with it if he actually encountered anyone. His military training was 35 years ago, and his body is not what it once was. But the weapon gives him a measure of comfort, a physical connection to the Rome that had trained him, the empire that had seemed so eternal and is now revealed to be so fragile. The villa is empty of raiders, though the destruction they have wrought is comprehensive. Every room has been turned upside down in the search for valuables. The small library where Marcus's father had kept his precious collection of scrolls is in ruins, the scrolls torn and scattered, some of them used as kindling for small fires that the raiders had built to warm themselves while they worked. Marcus kneels among the wreckage and picks up a fragment of parchment, recognizing the elegant script as coming from his father's copy of Tacitus's Histories. The fragment reads, "And so the empire, which had seemed eternal as the stars themselves, revealed itself to be mortal after all, subject to the same laws of decay that govern all human institutions." How appropriate, Marcus thinks bitterly, tucking the fragment into his tunic. Even in destruction, the old writers have wisdom to offer. He makes his way to what had once been the courtyard garden, now overgrown and wild, but still containing the stone fountain that has been dry for 5 years. The sky is beginning to lighten in the east, false dawn giving way to true dawn, and in the growing light he can see the full extent of the damage. The villa is not destroyed, but it has been violated, stripped of anything valuable or useful. The lead pipes that had once carried water from the aqueduct have been torn from the walls. The bronze door handles and hinges have been removed. Even the iron nails have been pried from the wooden beams where they were accessible. Marcus walks to the outer wall and looks down toward the village. The fires have mostly burned themselves out now, leaving only smoking ruins. He can see bodies lying in the street, dark shapes that he tries not to look at too closely. The raiders have moved on, heading north along the old road, carrying their plunder with them into the wilderness that grows closer every day as civilization retreats. He stands there for a long time, watching the sun rise over a changed world. The light that falls across the landscape seems different somehow, harsher, less forgiving. Or perhaps it is only his own eyes that have changed, forced now to see clearly what he had been able to avoid seeing before. Rome is gone, not just from Britain, but from the world. The eternal empire has ended, and what comes next is uncertain, frightening, perhaps barbaric. Behind him, he hears Julia emerge from the house, sees her take in the destruction with wide, horrified eyes. She comes to stand beside him at the wall, and together they look out at the ruins of the village, at the smoking remains of a world that had seemed so solid just hours before. "What do we do now?" she asks softly. Marcus takes a deep breath, smelling smoke and dew and the rich earth of autumn, and he feels the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders, the responsibility of being one of the last true Romans in this corner of the world. He thinks of his grandfather landing on the beaches of Britain, bringing law and civilization to what had been a wild, untamed land. He thinks of all the generations between then and now, building and creating and believing in something larger than themselves. And he thinks of what must be preserved, what cannot be allowed to die even if Rome herself is dead. "We endure," he says finally. "We rebuild. We remember. We teach our children and our grandchildren what it means to be Roman, even if there is no longer a Rome to be Roman for. We preserve the books and the learning and the ideas, and we wait for the world to be ready for civilization again." He turns to look at her, this daughter who has inherited his stubbornness if nothing else, and he sees in her eyes the same determination that he feels in his own heart. They will not go gently into the barbaric night that is falling across Britain. They will hold on to civilization with their fingernails if necessary, will keep the lamp of learning lit even as darkness gathers. "Come," he says, taking her hand, "let us see what can be salvaged. The raiders are gone, and we have work to do." Together they walk back toward the violated villa, toward the long and uncertain future that awaits them, carrying with them the weight of all the centuries that came before, and the desperate hope for all the centuries yet to come. As they cross the threshold, Marcus thinks again of that fragment from Tacitus, and he adds his own silent amendment to the old historian's words. Yes, the empire revealed itself to be mortal after all, subject to decay like all human institutions. But ideas are not institutions, and civilization is not merely stone and marble and law. It is something that lives in the hearts and minds of people, something that can survive even the fall of empires, if only there are those brave enough or stubborn enough to carry it forward into the darkness. He does not know if he is such a person. He does not know if his strength will be sufficient to the task. But he knows that he must try, because the alternative is to surrender not just his own life, but the lives of all those who came before him, to declare that their sacrifices meant nothing, and their dreams were empty. And that, Marcus Flavius Cornelius decides, is something he will never do, not while breath remains in his body and memory remains in his mind. The villa will be repaired, as much as it can be with their limited resources. The scrolls will be gathered and preserved. The children will be taught to read Latin and to understand Roman law and to appreciate the difference between civilization and barbarism. And perhaps, in some distant future that Marcus will never see, when the wheel of history turns again, and men grow tired of chaos and violence and yearn once more for order and beauty and meaning, something of what they preserve here will help light the way back to civilization. It is a small hope, hardly more than a candle flame in a great darkness. But it is hope nonetheless, and hope is what separates men from beasts, civilization from barbarism, Rome from the chaos that surrounds it. Marcus squares his shoulders and enters his ruined home, and begins the work of endurance. The morning grows brighter, and with it comes a cold clarity. Marcus and Julia move through the villa room by room, assessing the damage and salvaging what they can. In the dining room, they find that the raiders have taken the silver serving dishes that had been in the family for 3 generations, but they have missed a small bronze statue of Mercury that had fallen behind a broken cabinet. Marcus picks it up, running his thumb over the smooth metal, feeling the weight of it in his hand. It is a small thing, barely valuable even in better times, but it represents continuity, a physical link to the world that was. In the library, the destruction is more thorough and more painful. Most of the scrolls have been damaged beyond repair, torn or burned or simply scattered to the wind that blows through the broken shutters. But Marcus finds a few that survived relatively intact, rolled into a corner where they were overlooked in the raiders' haste. Among them is his father's copy of Virgil's Aeneid, the very scroll from which Marcus himself learned to read. The papyrus is yellow with age and brittle at the edges, but the words are still legible, still speaking across the centuries with undiminished power. He sits down amid the wreckage and unrolls the scroll carefully, finding the passage he is looking for almost without thinking, his fingers knowing the way from decades of familiarity. The words swim before his eyes, and he realizes with some surprise that he is crying, tears cutting tracks through the soot and dust that coats his face. Arma virumque cano, he reads aloud, his voice rough with emotion. I sing of arms, and the man who first from the shores of Troy, exiled by fate, came to Italy and the Lavinian shores. Much was he tossed about on land and sea by the power of the gods, because of fierce Juno's never-forgetting anger, and he suffered many things in war also, until he could found a city and bring his gods into Latium, from which came the Latin race, the lords of Alba, and the walls of lofty Rome. The irony does not escape him. Here he sits in the ruins of Roman Britain, reading about the founding of Rome, about refugees who fled a burning city to establish a new civilization in a foreign land. History echoes and repeats, he thinks, cycles within cycles, and perhaps what seems like an ending is actually a beginning, though of what he cannot say. Julia appears in the doorway, and he looks up to see her carrying an armload of vegetables from the garden. The raiders did not bother with the food, she says. I suppose they had easier pickings elsewhere. We will not starve. At least not immediately. Marcus nods and carefully rolls up the scroll, setting it aside. We should check on the village, he says, though he dreads what they will find there. There may be wounded who need help, and we must know who survived. They make their way down the hill, through the overgrown orchard where apples hang heavy on the branches, unpicked and beginning to rot. The path is muddy from the recent rains, and the morning sun has not yet burned off the mist that still clings to the ground, giving everything a dreamlike, unreal quality. Marcus can hear birds singing, their cheerful voices seeming grotesquely out of place given what has happened, as if nature itself should be in mourning. As they approach the village, the smell of burned thatch and timber becomes overwhelming. The roundhouses, with their conical roofs and wattle and daub walls, have proven terribly vulnerable to fire. Marcus counts at least 12 structures that have been completely destroyed, reduced to blackened circles of ash and charred post holes. Others are damaged but not destroyed, their roofs burned away but their walls still standing, open to the sky like the socket of a pulled tooth. There are people moving among the ruins, salvaging what they can, but their movements are slow and mechanical, the movements of people in shock. Marcus sees old Bronwyn, the village baker, sitting in front of what had been her home, rocking back and forth and keening in the old British style, a sound that raises the hair on the back of Marcus's neck. Her husband lies beside her, covered with a cloak, and Marcus does not need to lift it to know that he is dead. Craddock emerges from one of the partially standing structures, his face blackened with soot, his tunic torn and blood-stained. When he sees Marcus, something flickers across his face. Not quite hostility, but not welcome either. Something more complicated. Something that makes Marcus's stomach tighten with unease. Cornelius, Caradoc says, using Marcus's family name with none of the warmth that had characterized their interactions before. You survived the night, I see. As did you, Marcus replies carefully. What happened here, Caradoc? Who were these raiders? The village headman laughs, a bitter sound without humor. Raiders? Is that what you think they were? He spits into the mud at his feet. They were our own people, Marcus. Farmers from the estates to the north. Villagers from the settlements beyond the forest. Desperate men with hungry families, who heard that we still had grain in our stores and silver in our houses. Julia makes a small sound of distress, and Marcus reaches out to steady her. Surely not all of them were, he begins, but Caradoc cuts him off. All of them? No, but enough, and led by men who should have known better. Men who claimed they were taking back what was rightfully theirs, what had been stolen from their ancestors by Rome. Caradoc looks at Marcus directly now, and there is something in his eyes that Marcus has never seen before, a hardness that speaks of choices made and lines crossed. They spoke of you, Marcus, of the Roman villa on the hill, with its fine walls and its stores of food, while people starve in the countryside. I see, Marcus says quietly, understanding now the full extent of what has shifted in the world overnight. It is not just Rome that has fallen, but the entire social order that Rome created. The web of relationships and obligations and mutual respect that held the province together. And did you tell them that my family has always dealt fairly with the village? That we have shared our harvests in lean years? That we have never withheld grain when people were hungry? I told them, Caradoc says, and now there is something that might be regret in his voice. I told them that you were a good man, Marcus, that your family has been good to us. But they did not care. They see you as Roman, and Rome has abandoned us. Why should they honor the old agreements when there is no longer any power to enforce them? Marcus feels the ground shifting beneath his feet, the old certainties crumbling like the walls of his villa. And what do you see me as, Caradoc? He asks. Am I still your neighbor and friend? Or am I now just another Roman to be driven out or destroyed? The headman is silent for a long moment, looking at Marcus with an expression that is almost sorrowful. I see you as a man caught between two worlds, he says finally. Neither fully Roman nor fully British, belonging nowhere in the world that is coming. I pity you, Marcus, truly I do. But pity will not protect you if they come back, and they will come back, sooner or later. This was only the beginning. Julia's hand tightens on Marcus's arm, her fingers digging in with sudden fear. Then what are we to do? She asks. Where can we go? Caradoc looks at her, and something softens in his face. You could stay here, he says. In the village. Renounce your Roman ways. Take a British name, live as we live. You would be safe then, or as safe as anyone can be in these times. Ma! Marcus feels the words like a knife to his heart. Renounce what he is. Deny his heritage. Abandon everything his family has stood for across the generations. It is unthinkable. And yet, looking at Julia's frightened face, at the ruins of the village around him, at the future that seems to stretch ahead like a dark tunnel with no visible end, He wonders if it might not be the only practical choice. But even as he considers it, he knows he cannot do it. He thinks of that fragment from Tacitus tucked in his tunic, of the scroll of Virgil he left in the library, of all the accumulated knowledge and wisdom and beauty that Rome has created over 1,000 years of history. Someone must preserve it. Someone must remember. If everyone simply surrenders to the tide of barbarism, then the light goes out completely, and the darkness that follows will be total and perhaps permanent. Thank you for the offer, Marcus says, and he means it sincerely. But I cannot accept. I am what I am, Caradoc. I was raised Roman, and I will die Roman, even if Rome herself is dead. Caradoc nods slowly, as if this is the answer he expected. Then I can only wish you fortune in whatever path you choose, old friend. But do not wait too long to choose. The world is changing fast, and it does not favor those who cling to the past. They leave the village then, Marcus and Julia, walking back up the hill toward the violated villa in silence. The sun is fully up now, burning off the last of the mist, and the day promises to be clear and bright, beautiful in a way that seems to mock the ugliness of what has happened. Behind them, the villagers continue their grim work of counting the dead and salvaging what can be saved from the ruins. As they approach the villa, they see Cassius waiting for them at the gate, or what remains of it. The old servant's face is grave, and Marcus feels a fresh stab of anxiety. "What is it?" he asks. "Master, there is a man here, a stranger. He came while you were at the village. He says he has news from Londinium, and he will speak only to you." Marcus exchanges a glance with Julia, then follows Cassius into the villa courtyard. A man is waiting there, standing by the dry fountain. He is perhaps 40 years old, thin and travel-worn, wearing the remnants of what had once been respectable clothing but which is now stained and patched and threadbare. He has the look of a man who has traveled far and seen much, and none of it good. "You are Marcus Flavius Cornelius?" the man asks without preamble. "I am." "And you are?" "My name is Quintus Petronius. I was a clerk in the governor's office in Londinium before—" He trails off, making a vague gesture that seems to encompass the collapse of everything. "I am traveling west, trying to reach the coast, to find passage to Gaul. I stopped in your village hoping to buy food, and I was told you might be able to help." "As you can see," Marcus says, gesturing at the wreckage of the villa, "we were raided last night. We have little enough for ourselves, much less to sell to travelers." "I will pay well," Quintus says quickly. "I have a small amount of silver left, and I am desperate. My wife and daughter," he swallows hard, "they wait for me at a villa 2 days' journey from here. I promised them I would return with supplies." Marcus feels his resistance weakening. The man is clearly telling the truth, and there is something in his eyes, a haunted quality that speaks of terrible experiences. "What news do you bring from Londinium?" he asks. "You said you had news." Quintus laughs, but there is no humor in it. "News? I bring the end of the world, friend. Londinium is finished. The city empties by the day. Those with means flee to Gaul or Hispania. Those without means flee into the countryside or stay and starve. The government, such as it was, has dissolved. There is no magistrate, no council, no authority of any kind. The few soldiers who remain are little better than bandits themselves." "And Rome?" Julia asks softly. "What news from Rome itself?" Quintus looks at her, and in his eyes is a sorrow so deep it seems bottomless. "Rome burned," he says simply. "The Visigoths sacked the city. Alaric himself walked through the forum and looted the temples. The eternal city fell, and with it any pretense that the empire can be restored. It is over. All of it is over." The words fall into the courtyard like stones into a well, and for a long moment no one speaks. Marcus feels something fundamental shift inside him, some last fragile hope that he had not even been fully aware he was holding. If Rome herself has fallen, truly fallen, then there is nothing left to cling to, no distant power that might someday return to restore order and civilization to the provinces. I am sorry to be the bearer of such tidings, Quintus continues. But you deserve to know the truth. Everyone deserves to know. The world we knew is gone, and we must make what peace we can with the world that is coming. Marcus nods slowly, absorbing this, feeling the weight of it settling into his bones. Julia, he says finally, take Quintus to the storeroom. Give him what food we can spare. He has paid for it with news, if nothing else. After they leave, Marcus sits down on the edge of the dry fountain, looking up at the morning sky. It is the same sky he has looked at all his life, the same sun that rose over Roman Britain for 3.5 centuries. But somehow it seems different now, as if the light that falls through it comes from a more distant source, takes longer to arrives colder and less comforting than before. He thinks of his son Lucius, somewhere in Gaul, and wonders if the boy, no, the man now, has heard the news about Rome. He wonders what Lucius will do, whether he will continue trying to make his way in a world without Rome, or whether he will do what Caradoc suggested and simply let go of his Roman identity, blend into whatever new world emerges from the ruins of the old. He thinks of his grandsons, Julia's children, who will grow up in a world so different from the one he knew that it might as well be a different planet. What will he tell them about Rome? What stories will he pass down? Will they believe him when he describes the glory that was? Or will they think he is simply a delusional old man clinging to myths and fantasies? And he thinks, inevitably, of his grandfather Gaius, who came to these shores as a young soldier, full of confidence in Rome's power and permanence. What would the old man think if he could see what has become of his dreams? Would he regret the invasion, the centuries of occupation, the transformation of Britain into a Roman province? Or would he see it as having been worthwhile despite the ending? Worthwhile simply because, for a few brief centuries, this island knew the light of civilization, experienced law and order and beauty and the possibility of something greater than mere survival. Marcus does not know the answer. He is not sure there is an answer. History is not a story with a clear moral, a tale told by the gods to teach men lessons. It is simply what happens, the endless churning of events and consequences, and men must make what meaning they can from the chaos. Cassius appears at his elbow, and Marcus realizes he has been sitting here for some time, lost in thought. Master, the old servant says gently, we should begin cleaning up. There is much work to do. Yes, Marcus agrees, rising stiffly. Yes, there is always work to do. That is perhaps the one constant in all of this change. Work remains, and those who will do it. They spend the rest of the day in labor, Marcus and his small household, cleaning and organizing and trying to restore some semblance of order to the chaos the raiders left behind. It is exhausting work, made harder by the knowledge that it is largely futile. The villa will never be what it was, and even if they manage to repair the worst of the damage, there is no guarantee they will be able to hold it against the next wave of desperate men seeking plunder. But Marcus works anyway, because work is better than despair, and action is better than surrender. He works because his grandfather would have worked, because generations of Romans have faced adversity and worked their way through it, and because some part of him still believes, against all evidence, that civilization can survive if enough people refuse to let it die. As evening approaches, Quintus prepares to leave, his pack now filled with bread and dried meat and apples from the orchard. He clasps Marcus's hand in farewell, and there is something like kinship in his eyes, the recognition of one survivor by another. What will you do? Quintus asks. Will you stay here? Marcus looks around at the villa, at its cracked walls and broken shutters and violated rooms. For now, he says, this is my home, for better or worse, and someone needs to stay to maintain the memory of what was. If everyone leaves, if everyone simply abandons the cities and the villas and the roads, then Rome truly dies, not just politically, but culturally. The barbarians will have won completely. Perhaps they have already won, Quintus suggests gently. Perhaps the question is not whether to resist, but how to survive in the world they are creating. Perhaps, Marcus acknowledges. But I am too old to change what I am. I will stay, and I will teach my grandsons to read Latin, and I will preserve what books I can, and I will hold on to civilization with both hands even as it slips through my fingers. It is all I know how to do. Quintus nods, understanding. Then I wish you fortune, Marcus Flavius Cornelius. Perhaps we will meet again in better times. Perhaps, Marcus says, though he does not believe it. Safe travels, Quintus Petronius. May whatever gods still listen watch over you and your family. After the man leaves, Marcus stands at the gate watching him disappear down the road toward the west, toward the coast, and whatever uncertain future waits there. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of red and gold and purple, beautiful and indifferent to human suffering. Marcus has seen thousands of sunsets in his life, but this one feels different, feels like the closing of something that can never be reopened. He turns and walks back into the villa, where Julia has managed to prepare a simple meal of porridge and vegetables. They eat together in what had been the kitchen, the room that suffered least from the raiders' attention, sitting on rough wooden stools and eating from clay bowls that survived by virtue of being too common to be worth stealing. I have been thinking, Julia says as they eat, her voice hesitant, about what Caradoc said, about us staying in the village. Marcus sets down his spoon, his appetite suddenly gone. Julia, no, father, hear me out, not for me, but for the children. They are young enough to adapt, to learn British ways, to make a life here when the old world is gone. What future is there for them as Romans? What can we offer them except memories and regret? Marcus looks at his daughter, at the worry etched into her face, the premature lines that hardship has carved around her eyes and mouth. She is trying to protect her children, he knows. It is the most natural thing in the world, the most human, and yet he cannot give her the answer she wants. Their future as Romans, he says carefully, is the same as their future as anything else. Uncertain, dangerous, but not hopeless. Julia, listen to me. What Caradoc offers is safety purchased at the price of identity. Your sons would be safe, perhaps, but they would not be who they are. They would not know their heritage, their history, where they came from, or what their ancestors believed in and fought for. Is that really better than the alternative? If the alternative is death, Julia asks, her voice sharp with fear and frustration. Yes, father, it is better. What good is heritage to a corpse? What good is identity to someone who starves or falls to a raider's sword? She is right, of course. On one level, she is absolutely right. Survival trumps philosophy, and a living child who speaks British and worships the old gods is better than a dead child who died clutching a Latin primer. Marcus knows this. He knows it with the rational part of his mind that can analyze situations objectively and calculate odds and make the practical choice. But there is another part of him, the part that learned to read from Virgil and studied law from his father and believes in the idea of Rome even when Rome itself has failed. That part cannot surrender so easily. That part insists that some things matter more than mere survival, that there are principles worth dying for even if they seem impractical in the harsh light of current circumstances. You may be right, he says finally, and I will not stop you if you choose to take your sons to the village, to make that choice for them. You are their mother, and that gives you rights that supersede mine. But I cannot do it, Julia. I cannot pretend to be something I am not, cannot abandon what I believe in, simply because it has become dangerous to believe in it. I am Roman, and I will remain Roman, whatever the cost. Julia looks at him for a long moment, and he sees tears gathering in her eyes. Then we will stay, she says softly. Because I will not abandon you, father, even if you are the most stubborn and foolish man in all of Britain. We will stay, and we will be Romans together, and whatever comes will come. Marcus reaches across the rough wooden table and takes her hand, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength in her fingers. "Thank you," he whispers, his own voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, daughter." They finish their meal in silence, and afterward Marcus excuses himself, needing to be alone with his thoughts. He makes his way through the dark villa to the library, where he lights a precious candle, they have so few left, and sits among the wreckage of his father's book collection. He picks up the Virgil scroll again, unrolling it carefully, and begins to read, his lips moving silently as he works through the familiar Latin. The story of Aeneas fleeing Troy, of losing everything and everyone he loved, of carrying his father on his back and leading his son by the hand into an uncertain future. The story of a man who persevered despite impossible odds, who maintained his duty and his values even when the gods themselves seemed arrayed against him, who eventually succeeded in planting the seeds of a new civilization in foreign soil. It is, Marcus realizes, the story he is living now. He too is fleeing a fallen city, metaphorically if not literally. He too must choose what to preserve and what to abandon, must decide what matters enough to be carried forward into whatever comes next. He too must maintain his principles in the face of adversity, must believe in something larger than himself even when all evidence suggests that belief is foolish. And perhaps, just perhaps, if he can do this, if he can hold on to civilization and learning and beauty for just a little longer, then some seed of Rome will survive to bloom again in a future he will never see. It is a small hope, absurdly small measured against the vastness of the disaster that has overtaken the world. But it is all he has, and he will cling to it with the same desperate determination that Aeneas clung to the remnants of Troy's sacred fire. Outside, night has fully fallen, and the autumn wind rises again, rattling the broken shutters and moaning through the cracked walls. It sounds almost like voices, Marcus thinks. The voices of all those who have lived and died in this place. The soldiers and farmers and slaves and merchants who made Roman Britain their home for 3.5 centuries. Are they lamenting the end, he wonders, or are they simply reminding him that life goes on, that civilizations rise and fall but humanity endures? He reads late into the night, the candle burning lower and lower, until finally exhaustion overtakes him and he falls asleep in his chair, the scroll of Virgil still clutched in his hands, dreaming of Troy burning and Rome falling, and through it all the thin thread of continuity, the preserved memory, the idea that refuses to die even when every stone of its manifestation has crumbled to dust. When he wakes in the gray light of dawn, stiff and cold, the candle long since gutted, he finds Julia has covered him with a blanket during the night, a small act of care that moves him more than he can say. He rises slowly, his joints protesting, and looks out the window at the new day. The villa still stands, damaged but not destroyed. His family still lives, frightened but not defeated. The books still exist, torn and scattered, but not completely lost. It is enough, he thinks. It has to be enough. He begins his day, as he has begun every day of his adult life, with prayers to the gods of Rome. Though the household shrine was vandalized by the raiders, and the small bronze figurines of the Lares Familiares were stolen, he prays anyway, words spoken into empty air, maintaining the rituals because the rituals matter, because they connect him to all the generations that came before and, perhaps, to generations yet to come. After prayers, he makes his way to the kitchen, where Cassius has somehow managed to coax the old cooking hearth back to life. There is porridge again, monotonous but nourishing, and Marcus eats it gratefully, tasting in its bland warmth a kind of promise. Today is another day, and there will be another after it, and life continues despite everything. Over breakfast they make plans, practical plans, survival plans. The orchard needs to be harvested before the fruit rots. The roof needs temporary repairs before the autumn rains intensify. They need to visit the village again, to establish new terms with Caradoc and the others, to find some way to coexist in this changed world. There is work to be done, endless work, and Marcus finds himself grateful for it. And so begins the aftertime, the strange new era that will one day be called the Dark Ages, though to those living through it, It simply feels like reality, like the way things are, and perhaps always have been. Marcus and his family will endure for years yet in their crumbling villa, preserving what they can, teaching what they know, maintaining the memory of Rome even as Rome itself fades into legend. The story does not end here, because stories never truly end. They simply transform, one narrative flowing into another, the eternal human story of struggle and survival and the stubborn refusal to surrender hope even in the darkest of times. Marcus Flavius Cornelius will die eventually, as all men do, but the seeds he plants, the knowledge preserved, the values maintained, the example set, will outlive him, threading through the centuries of darkness ahead until eventually, slowly, painfully, civilization begins to rebuild itself from the ruins. But that is a tale for another time, for other voices. For now, in the autumn of 410, on a remote hillside in what was once Roman Britain, an old man and his family face another day in the ruins of empire, and in their endurance lies all the quiet heroism that history, when it remembers them at all, will ever record.